What's up, guys? This is Preheat coming at you with a video about my first impressions of the new raid coming out in Shadowlands Castle Nathria. As some of you might know, I also have an article that basically covers my thoughts on this. It's on Wowhead. It'll be linked in the description down below. This is actually a recording of a VOD that I did the same day the article came out. So whenever I release articles on Wowhead, I usually pop on the stream and kind of discuss them, so that we can kind of do a Q&A and kind of talk about these things together. So anyways, if you're in a part of that, definitely, follow me on Twitch so that you can get those notifications, or Twitter, because I usually tweet about this stuff anyways. For your enjoyment, here is that VOD. So yeah, this is this article I was asked to write. It's basically talking about the raid. So as I'm sure everyone knows, we finished raid testing every boss. We've done every boss on Heroic. At this point, I think it's pretty fair to kind of give a first impression of like what seems to be the overall theme of the raid, what seems to be probably pretty good. There are a couple things before we get started. One, I'm not going to discuss strategy at all. Like, I'm not going to give up anything that might, endanger some sort of advantage or some sort of secret strats that we have. I'm going to try to keep it like pretty, straightforward. Just to respect everyone who I test with, and to not really get lost in the weeds as well. So I think it makes it better for you guys too. Two, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that some classes are pretty busted on beta. Like if you've been following the tuning at all, it should be pretty obvious which classes are kind of busted right now. So, we'll talk about that kind of stuff, but I don't want to give like specifics on which classes are like going to be insane for which mechanics on the fight. I'm going to try to just kind of, keep it pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty obvious what's good where. So, yeah, if you're following along, Warlocks are pretty good. Yep, those guys are pretty good. Anyways, but yeah, so I'm not gonna discuss strategy. I'm not gonna talk about which classes like specifically do what well. I'm gonna try to avoid getting in the weeds on that. I want to give kind of just my first impressions, right? Like what do I think of the raid? And what is like the theme of the raid? What is each boss has its own flavor, right? But usually there's kind of like an overall idea of what's going on. The best way to kind of give the comparison is Nyalotha. Let's talk about Nyalotha. So I think at this point we're all probably pretty familiar with Nyalotha. I think at this point we can kind of talk about Nyalotha in terms of like what the general theme of it is, right? In the case of Nyalotha, obviously that's a cleave tier, right? It's a tier where every boss basically is a cleave boss. Like if we go to the Nyalotha bosses, every single boss pretty much has like some sort of cleave element to it, right? So with Nyalotha, like I think it's pretty safe to say that fire mages are just insanely broken on this raid. Like even if fire was like, let's say, nerfed by 30%, I think you would still run fire, like all fire mages on Carapace for like the extra range slots, and the same with Bazoth. Like it's too good, right? Like the raid is designed around cleave. There's actually a comparison here to Castle Nathria. So in the castle, it seems like the best classes are the ones that kind of do dots. It's definitely not a cleave tier. And if we kind of go boss by boss, you'll kind of see why. But it's definitely a little bit different. Nathria, yeah, whatever it's called. Nathria, Castle Nathria, there we go. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Preheat. I am a mage / range player in Complexity Limit, World First Guild, an officer and founding member. Also do stuff for Wowhead. So hello. I also stream on Twitch. Castle Nathria. It was announced at BlizzCon. I was there. It was really awesome. Really super hyped. The way that they described it, it's like Dracula's castle, right? So, I mean, like, in all the promotional art and stuff, it's very, like, gothic, very cool. It's like the Edgelord Vampire raid, right? And if you've watched anything from beta, if you've played beta at all, it should be pretty obvious kind of what the overall theme is. It's basically the Venthyr aesthetic, right? You got vampires, you got gargoyles, you got you know, all sorts of weird oh, they're not really demons, but they kind of look demonic, right? It's like all of that kind of stuff. Super, super vampire aesthetic. And honestly, it's great. It's great, yeah. The aesthetic is great. I actually love it. Like, I was kind of like laughing to myself whenever they announced it because, you know, it's like Hot Topic, right? It's like, this is the Hot Topic raid, but you know what? I think they kind of nailed it. So yeah, if you guys want the information about the bosses, like the actual specifics on each move that they do, I've included a link here. This is the Shadowlands Beta Encounter Journal. For YouTube in the future, there's going to be a thing up top that you can click that'll lead to this. Anyways, so let's talk about the bosses. So this is a 10 boss raid, and it's got 2 wings. So if we look at the design of it, this kind of doesn't do a great job of explaining, but basically there's like 2 different ways you can go. I think one way is like just boss, and then you move on, and then the other way it like breaks out into all these different rooms that you have to clear a bunch of bosses in, right? So I don't have a picture handy, but if we were to like draw a really quick thing, it's probably going to be something like this. You walk in, you probably kill a boss, and then it forks, and then there's going to be like stuff this way, and then it comes back. And then on this side, you probably like have a choice of like 3 different ones, and then you probably have like another 3. And then you probably move on to the same point where this is, right? So if I were to guess, it's like 6 bosses over here, and then 2 over here, and then 2 over here. Or maybe it's 1 and 1, who knows? But I think this is like kind of the idea. I don't know the specifics. There are other people out there who have like determined what the order is, and they, you know, it's speculation at this point, so I'm not really going to get too much into it. Just know that basically there's 2 sides, and one side has like a bunch of bosses, and the other side is like more straightforward. So there's like a lot of second bosses. From what I can gather though, there's only one first boss, which is Shriek Wing. So Shriek Wing is this guy right here. If you watch the testing for this, this is like the most entertaining boss I've ever seen. So Shriek Wing is a really cool boss. Basically, he just kind of derps around the room. It's a pretty straightforward fight. I mean, it is a first boss of a raid, so you can't expect too much, right? But basically, there are 2 phases to this fight. Now, the first phase is like super straightforward. The boss basically just sits there and does like an AoE you have to hide from, okay? And you just do damage to it. No big deal, whatever, right? And you drop stacks by sitting in the poison. But the second phase is where it gets really cool. So basically, this boss does kind of like a hide and seek game. So the boss basically goes to the middle of the room. Everyone has to hide behind pillars. On a timer, the boss will let out a sonar, and then everyone has to hide during the sonar. If you're outside, you'll get stunned, and the boss will find you and drop on you and do a bunch of damage. There's also all these little like balls that are flying around the room, and if you touch any of them, the same thing happens, right? So basically, you're like playing hide and seek, but you also have to avoid the shell on the ground. And if you get hit, everyone around you also gets hit. So if you're like hiding with a bunch of friends, and one of those friends is not necessarily the best hide and seek player, they're gonna get hit, and you're gonna get killed because they got hit. In fact, it seemed to me like most of the time the people that died were not the people that fucked up. It was like people around the person that fucked up. So I wrote here, the second phase is where things get hilarious. You play hide and seek with the boss with the pillars that provide line of sight. The boss periodically casts a screech and emits orbs with dark sonar. If you get caught by the dark sonar or aren't hiding when the boss finishes each cast, you and everyone around you get stunned and hit by deadly descent, which deals physical damage to you and everyone around you within 12 yards, which is fatal in most cases. So yeah, normally I wouldn't talk this much about the first boss. Like, well, you know, whenever it comes to first bosses, usually there's not that much to talk about, right? Like usually it's pretty straightforward. But in this case, it's actually a little bit different because this is one of those first bosses that is just like, just chef kiss good, man. This boss is going to kill friends. Their friendships are going to be ruined, ended. Guilds are going to fall apart. You're going to have pugs that start up. They're really excited, and then they just die instantly. This is the pug killer boss because on Mythic, there's like another mechanic where you have to kind of like follow someone around with like a lantern. This is like the ultimate like fuck you to everyone who wants a pug. It cracks me up. It really does, because Blizzard's like, oh, you want to pug a boss? Well, guess what? You're gonna have to be coordinated, or else this is gonna be a giant fucking dumpster fire. So yeah, I mean, it's great. I love it. I love the fact that there's a first boss right out the gate, where Blizzard is just gonna slam this boss on you that's gonna ruin your friendships, and I love it. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Shriek Wing. It's a fun fight. Oh, so let's talk about this, about what's going to fight. Single target, right? Single target, that's it. There's no ads or anything like that. Okay, so moving on to the Huntsman. Huntsman is one of the potential second bosses. Basically, this is like kind of the outlier in the raid. It's basically the only fight that's cleaved this raid. So really, the castle's not full of cleave fights. But if you do cleave, this is actually a boss that you can cleave on, right? Most of the fight is just him and a bear. So him and his little bears, they come out. You know, he summons beasts, they fight alongside him, you fight him. The tuning was pretty good, the overall mechanics were pretty easy to understand. There's like this really cool mechanic where like stuff comes out and you have to CC it, and you CC it and it takes more damage after you CC it. It was pretty cool. But if any of the casts go off, usually it's a wipe. If any like cleaves happen, people probably die because the boss will cleave people. But I mean, overall it's like a pretty straightforward fight, right? You just kind of cleave the boss. That's what, I mean, it is what it is, right? Like the tuning's like pretty easy on this fight, so, or at least it was on the testing, so. My impression of the fight is, I like cleave fights. Obviously, I have a little bit of a bias, but you know, it seemed like an interesting enough boss, and I mean, given that this could be a second boss, I think this is like a baby fight, right? Like, it's not going to be anything too complex, right? So, in fact, I would probably say that the bosses after Shriek Wing are probably a little bit easier, just generally across the board with the tuning that was out. Maybe that's because the group I was testing with sucks at the sonar. Maybe it's because the bosses are actually harder. Who knows? It could be us. You never know. You never know. Okay, so moving on to Hungary Destroyer. This is what the boss looks like here. He's just a big old boy. And this boss, he does a lot of damage. So, you know, generally whenever people want to meme on you, whenever you're doing a raid boss, they'll say things like, oh, it's easy. You lower the boss's hit points to 0 before yours hit 0, and you win the fight. That's like the, you know, sarcastic kid way of saying how to do a raid. But this boss really takes that to the extreme. The amount of damage output that this boss does is crazy. And it's one of those fights where healers aren't really in control of keeping people alive because there's basically like a leech buff that goes out where people have to have other people around them to suck the HP into that person. So it takes some coordination. And that person can't take any healing. They can only absorb HP from other people around them. So healers basically get frustrated on this fight, I'm sure, because they can't save people. The healing has to be like really quick as soon as the debuff's gone if they're low. And there are mechanics that deal damage and like have their radiuses expand or get smaller depending on what your HP pool is. So it's one of those fights where like if you have someone who's very low HP and a certain mechanic goes off and everyone has to spread out like it's Sponge, I believe is the name of the ability. Those circles that you have to spread out with are like their size is dependent on the missing health of the player. So yeah, I mean basically like Unit mechanics. I mean this is all like pretty, I mean they, you know, at this point in WoW, it's really hard to not reuse mechanics. I think it's pretty easy to compare basically every mechanic with another mechanic that's existed previously. Overall, my impressions of the fight, I really like the aesthetic of the boss. I really like the way he looks. All of his abilities are like this really cool blue effect. I'm a big fan of like the overall like aesthetic of the fight. I love how big the room is that you fight this guy in. It's just this massive room. You fight this boss in a massive room, and you actually need that room too, because he's got like all these abilities where basically it does like fall off damage based off how far away you are with the consume. So yeah, really cool fight. I like this fight a lot. It requires a lot of coordination too. The only thing I will say about this fight that kind of annoys me is that on the testing, the volatile ejection was bugged, and it would just randomly one-shot you if you had immunity. So like if you ever used an immune at any point during this fight, for some reason how it's coded for you to like take extra damage from the debuff or whatever, it wasn't like going away, and then it would just break and you would just die to the next one no matter what, which is pretty annoying. So there's like some bugs. I mean, like with every raid test there's gonna be bugs, right? So the boss had some bugs, whatever, no big deal. But the fight itself was great and I liked it, and he's actually pretty big. Like this boy is actually pretty big, so pretty cool. All right, so Artificer Zymox. So this is a single target boss. And he's got faces. It's all just like a gimmick, right? So he basically has this thing where two people get paired up and they create a gateway. And the whole fight is just like managing mechanics of the fight with the gateway. And it's all like super straightforward, super easy to understand. Yeah, so basically there's ads that chase after you. There's a part of the fight where there's like seeds you have to move around to get them away from everyone else so they don't explode. And then in the end, there's like a big suck. It sucks everyone into the middle, and you know, if you're caught in the middle, you'll die. So I mean, like, you just use the portals, right? Like, there's nothing too big brain about it. You put the portals in places that help you deal with the mechanics. Gimmicky fight, super easy to understand. Very, very. I'd say the tuning was pretty lax on it. The only thing about this fight that's weird is if you pull this fight in a like a group of like 10 people, or like whatever the minimum group is. For heroic, the same amount of mechanics happen, and it feels like a complete clusterfuck. So the fight like feels really hectic and bad if you're in a 10-man group, but if you're in a 30-man group, it feels really laid back because it's literally the same amount of mechanics. Like if you're 10-man, you just have everyone get every mechanic, and if you're 30-man, then only 10 people have to deal with the bullshit. And yeah, we've been joking that this is ironic, so. I slipped this in. I don't think the editor noticed, but yeah, little Easter egg for you. Okay, so Sun King's Salvation. So this fight is this fight is the worst. It's the worst. It's so bad. I don't know how else to describe this fight. So you know how they added in target caps to Shadowlands, right? Whoever designed this fight did not know that they were doing that. He or she had no idea that they were adding target caps because they designed this fight with like waves of like 20 enemies that come out constantly. And yeah, if you have target caps, it just feels like really bad. It feels really bad. I don't know how else to really, I mean, like, there's not much going on in this fight. It like the dungeon journal has like a lot of information. Like, it looks really daunting whenever you look at like the summary of this fight, but really there's not that much to understand. It's just, you know, you kill the ads, there's a little mini boss, you kill him, and then in between you heal stuff. Right? And really it's just about managing to kill everything that needs to be killed before it does the bad shit that kills you. And dealing with the fact that all of your AoE abilities are capped and there are like a bazillion mobs out. And what's really funny is if you start getting behind, they just keep coming. Like, we had a point where there were like 60 mobs out, I feel like. And it's just like, dude, what the fuck? How did you design a boss where there's like 50 to 60 mobs out and you added target caps at the same time? What? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, anyways, I think this fight is garbage. I hate it. But you know, there might be people out there that like it. Obviously, this is all my opinion, right? I'm just giving my opinions of my first impressions. My first impression of this fight is I'm really not into it. And I feel like it goes really counter to what they're trying to do with the overall systems of the game, like how they're adding target caps and stuff, and they're trying to really roll back to AoE. I feel like it just doesn't jive with that, and it makes no sense to me why this fight exists. How do healers feel about this fight? I think that they pretty much all just feel like it's too long. I don't think they really care too much about it. But, you know, they've been theory crafting super ways to do things, right? And, you know, I'm sure they're having fun theory crafting that stuff, but I think the fight itself is like really easy and straightforward. But who knows? Maybe we'll have this fight be really hard. If this fight's really hard, it's gonna suck though, because of how the target cap stuff works. I think it's probably like for the best if it's an easy fight. Okay, so Lady Anerva. This is a fight where basically there are objects in the room that you can interact with, which change how the fight works, which is really cool. It basically allows you to like choose the way that you're gonna do the fight. Which is neat. I like that. I like whenever player agency is part of the thought process, and you can like choose the mechanics to deal with depending on your comp, depending on your players, depending on what your strong suits are, depending on what's best, right? So basically there's like 4 different containers. They all have like different abilities. And then the whole mechanic of this fight is that they're filling with anima, and you don't want them to like reach the top because then there'll be a container breach and it does a bunch of damage to everyone. So you're basically like letting out the anima to each container like as it's about to fill, but you can also add it out or like remove the anima at other times to like manipulate which mechanics happen when, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it's a single target boss. There's some burst AoE. There's basically ads that come out. They spawn on players. You drop them. They have a cast that you have to interrupt. And then once they're dead, that's it. There's also this other really cool mechanic where basically people get linked up. Like 3 people get linked, so it's a triangle. And you have to basically like draw a shape with the triangle that you get to contain like these things that spawn the room, like these orbs. And once you do it, then they all go and you stop taking damage. But it's just like some really cool stuff with geometry. The ads, you know, there's a little burst AoE, which is kind of fun. You know, especially if you're like a 20-second class or something like that. And then the ability to like choose which container is gonna fill up, because as the containers fill up, there's levels, and those levels increase the mechanics that happen. So like it ramps up like the specific mechanics that container is tied to. But yeah, I like it. You know, there's a lot of neat stuff going on in this fight. The room looks awesome. I wish I would have included a picture of this room, but this boss is in the room where all the stuff is in the background. Like basically it's like you guys might have seen the room, but it's like a terrace, and then in the background it's like all of these anima containers, all like just, it's like the fucking Matrix, dude. You know, like in the Matrix, which like all the containers are like people. It's like that, but with anima containers. It's really cool. It looks really, really cool. So yeah, overall, it's a pretty cool fight. I enjoyed it a lot. Boss is really cool looking. The aesthetic of the fight's neat. I love the room that you fight the boss in, and the ability to like choose the mechanics is really fun too. Okay, next is the Council of Blood. So the Council of Blood is a fight that we were supposed to test again recently, but it ended up being a wash. But basically in this fight, there's like a giant ballroom that you're in. And imagine it from like Beauty and the Beast, right? Where there's like shit flying in the air. There's like a big ballroom. You know, it's very what's the best way to describe it? It's very Baroque, right? The whole thing. So anyways, very cool fight. It's a council fight. If you don't know what a council fight is, basically there are multiple bosses. You choose the order to kill them in. Each time you kill a boss, the other bosses get some sort of upgraded move. Okay, and usually it's a move like from the guy you killed. So basically you're like choosing which mechanic to remove from the fight, but you're also choosing which mechanic to add to the fight at the same time, depending on which guy you kill in which order. And then the last boss is obviously going to be the one that's the hardest, right? But every time you kill a boss is the HP of the bosses refills, right? So like you can't focus all the bosses down and just kill them all at the same time. Like if you did that, that would be terrible, because instantly the 2 bosses would just have their HP go back to full, right? So anyways, if you're not familiar with council fights, I don't know what you've been doing in a while, but there's your explanation. But yeah, you know, typically on council fights, classes that have funnel are the best ones to bring to fights like this. I don't really think there are many classes that still have funnel at this point. I think funnel was kind of like a thing of the past. It seems like most dot classes don't even have it. But basically there's these 3 boys that you fight. So there's kind of like a hunter aesthetic guy. There's like a, you know, this vampire man, and then there's this woman. They've all got like their distinct color, like green, red, and blue. They've all got their distinct move sets, like all of their abilities are kind of like themed with them. The aesthetic of it is like killer, like super, super cool. And there's a gimmick in this fight called Dance Macabre. And you basically have to like take a place and then you have to input buttons, kind of like Stepmania, but it's really easy. I don't know, I was kind of hoping that there would be like more of a rhythm game aspect to it, and it would actually be a little difficult. But it ends up that this fight is just super easy when it comes to that like special mechanic, the Waltz of Blood. There's not really much to it, so a little bit of a missed opportunity there, but overall, I love the aesthetic of the fight. It's not especially difficult. It's got a ton of personality. All of the NPCs have like their own very distinct styles, their abilities, their appearances are all very distinct. The fight is actually taking place in a room where there's like dancers flying above you, They also come through the dance floor and you have to avoid them or they'll stun you. Basically everything about this fight is great except for the dance itself. Like the actual dance that they make you do seemed like super lackluster and just like a huge missed opportunity, because basically you just move into a spot and then you press one of 4 buttons 4 times. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. So I'd like to see that more expanded on, I guess, in some way. Like I feel like that would be a really cool thing to like make a central mechanic of the fight, expand it outwards. But right now it's just like super simple. Yeah, it's kind of like Mechatork in a way. I think Mechatork actually has a way better mechanic than this though, because you actually have to tell your friends what to do, right? That's why it's kind of cool. But yeah, I kind of wish the dance was actually like a actual physical dance. Like there was stuff on the ground that forced you to move around. Yeah, exactly. Like, so Dance Wave, Schmanley says dance would have been more fun if the raid had a coordinated dance. Similar to how you move with KJ's platform for balls. Yeah, if there was something where it was like the mechanics of the fight like happened and you were like pacified and you had to like move around the floor a certain way, I feel like that'd be kind of cooler. All right, Sludge Fist. What is there to say about this boy? Absolute unit. Absolute fucking unit. Yo, look at the traps on this man. Look at this, dude. You think Sludge Fist ever misses a day of the gym? I don't think so, dude. I think Sludge Fist like is probably a gym rat. He skips leg day a bit, but you know, what can you do? It's a sick boss. This is I think Sludge Fist might actually be my favorite boss of all the bosses we tested. Yeah, it's basically Lorgok. So Sludge Fist is a very straightforward patchwork fight, but it's one of those patchwork fights where the tuning is tight as fuck. It's like there are a couple examples that you can kind of compare this to. So you could look at Guarm, you could look at Butcher. You could look at, what are other good fights that have been like that? What's the dog from the trial, with the 3 heads? I forget that dog's name. But anyways, him too. Oh, did I already list Grom? Okay. Or Fetid Devourer, that's the one I was trying to think of. Okay. Sorry, I got them mixed up in my head. Anyways, just, yeah, like any fight where it's like a very, very sick DPS burn fight. It's like a pretty quick fight, but the tuning's like very tight. Fed Devour's from Oldir. I was thinking of Fed Devourer whenever I say Gorm. So those are the 2 I got mixed up. Anyways, yeah, he's a boss kind of like that, right? So it's like a single target fight. It's basically a patchwork fight, but there is a lot of movement. There's a lot of mechanics that are happening, and there are damage amps, and the tuning is going to be really, really tight on this. Basically, there's like a soft enrage with this boss, where you have to kind of like make him charge into pillars, and then if there's no more pillars left and he charges, he's gonna hit a wall and the whole building's gonna start collapsing, and it's super epic, and it feels really cool too. But basically, yeah, so you're kind of dealing with the boss. He has all these like chain abilities, so he'll like chain you up with someone else, and then you have to like be close to that person, or you know, if you break the chain, it like kills you. He'll like have other chain abilities where people have to like stack up. There's like a lot of stuff where you basically have to like coordinate with other people and kind of get in the heads of your friends, kind of like Paranoia, to make sure that you don't do the wrong thing. So yeah, a bunch of chain mechanics. The room itself is part of the fight because he like breaks the pillars and you have to like deal with that and all the pieces that fall out. You have to deal with the fact that like once he hits a wall, the whole building's gonna collapse and you're gonna die. But it's one of those fights where it's like super tight. And it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of min-maxing and like how you move the guy around the room. I just really prefer fights like this. Like I feel like every tier should have a very, very tight single target patchworky kind of fight, because those kind of fights are always the most like exciting to me, at least, because you know, fights like this, it's like, okay, how do I min-max every little detail, right? Because it matters a lot. So I'm a big fan of this fight. So yeah, Sludge Fist, absolute unit. And if they tune this fight right, it will be one of the better fights. I think it might even be the best fight in this dungeon, except for maybe the last boss, or sorry, the raid, if they tune it right. So hopefully they do. Hopefully the tuning is tight on this boss, and it could be. He's like a contender for like third to last boss. I think in fact he might even be that third to last boss. So, I think that they could definitely tune him to be a very, very tight fight. and have it be at the point where it's still challenging to like us in a top end, world first guild kind of level, and also still be available to players that aren't at that level too, as they get more gear. Yeah, I hope they tune like Fallen Avatar. I mean, he's really cool. I like this fight a lot. And you're definitely like working against the clock, because the softened rage is you run out of pillars, he runs against the wall, boom. The raid's gonna take a shit ton of damage and you're gonna start dying. So he better be close to dead. I can just already feel it, like just from the testing, whenever we did this boss, it just felt super hype whenever we had the boss really low. And then we were like, okay, shit, we're gonna have to run him into the wall. So like, let's just like, only the warlocks are alive still, so like let's just like make him run as far as he can so that we can, get more time on execute. Stuff like that's pretty cool. And then everyone's like cheering and shit. People use their immunities to live. You know the gist of it. It's like, it's one of those fights where like even in testing it was hype, right? And I feel like, I mean, if you guys play World of Warcraft for the same reasons I do, you probably play it for the raids and like how the fights are. And there's really nothing quite like it, right? Like Final Fantasy comes close, but World of Warcraft, just the raid fights are on a whole different level. And the feeling that you get whenever you're about to kill a boss, that feeling of hype is just, there's nothing like it. And this boss, we had that even in the testing, so I can tell it's going to be a good one. I can really tell it's going to be a really good boss. Okay, moving on. Stoneborn Generals. So I know the Dungeon Journal like shows this as the last boss. It's not. It's just out of order there. Basically two guys. There's like a spread out. There's a stack, kind of like hive mind in the sense. And then whenever they get to certain HP percentages, then they go immune, and you have to deal with a bunch of ads that are flying around. The ads that fly around are like super high up in the air. Melee can't do shit to them. There's also an NPC that's flying around that basically kills all of them for you. So it feels like you're not really doing anything. The ads are like super high up. They've got like no HP at all. There's an NPC that just murders them for you. And they're really hard to target, and the bosses still do mechanics even though you're immune. So basically you're like having to look at the floor and make sure you aren't staying shit, but you're also having to look like as high up in the air as possible. And it's like really hard to target the guys in the air and do damage to them because you're, constantly moving and you're like looking up. And it just feels really weird. All of it feels really, really weird. I don't like this fight at all. I don't think it's designed well. I know that a lot of people in the guild have like different opinions on this fight. I'm probably in the minority of people who say that I don't like this fight, but I really don't. Like, I don't think it's a well-designed fight. The central mechanic of the fight is this bleed that goes out, and it never goes away. And the only way to get rid of it is to get yourself petrified, which basically makes you an enemy, and you have to break those enemies out. But if you guys remember, there are ways to get out of bleeds that don't necessarily involve boss mechanics, right? Maybe a little stone form? Maybe. But yeah, I mean, it's just weird. Like, why would you design the boss where the central mechanic is like so important, but then you can just get rid of it with a racial? Why? Yeah, Kyrian could do it too. Well, the Kyrian one's like bad though, because you're like wasting your potion. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't like this fight at all. Like, you can push the boss at a specific time where you can push into the intermission phase with no bleeds up, but it requires waiting and holding damage for like 30 seconds. So I don't like fights like this. I really don't like fights where it just feels like you're just waiting forever for like the perfect push time. Yeah, I don't know. And I don't like that they're just kind of like baiting Alliance, right? It's just like, oh, wouldn't you like to be Alliance? You get Stoneform. Come on over. Yeah, not a fan of this fight. I think it's garbage, and the experience of doing the fight was not good. Not a fan. But yeah, it's the second to last boss, so it'll probably end up being a good boss. It's just right now it's kind of in a weird state. Okay, so let's talk about Sire Nathria. So this boss, I need to be really careful to not talk anything strategy on this boss. So I'm going to keep it very, very much to the script of what I already wrote, because I've already, gone over this and made sure. But this last boss is a fucking banger. That's the only way to describe it. There is an intro to this fight. We're going to watch it really quick. This is from the Wowhead YouTube. It's linked in the article. But basically, he and the sword are here. They have a conversation. So the sword is actually like a central mechanic in the fight. which is pretty cool. Basically, there are 2 bosses. Volume. Oh yeah, I have this muted because I didn't want to have anything in the background happen. Let's turn off the music and let's turn on this. Okay. There's really nothing happening right now. I'm just letting you know that. There's no sound. The only sounds you're missing are like the sounds of him teleporting around. But yeah, basically him and the sword have a conversation. There's no voice lines or anything like that. He just kind of ports around and talks with the sword. And broods. Look at that painting of him in the background. Pretty cool. But so the overall like architecture of the fight in terms of like where you're fighting this guy, it's like a room kind of like Blackhand or oops, didn't mean to go to classic. Yeah, it's like, you know how in Blackhand you like fall through and you just like keep falling into like the next room and then the next room and all that. It's pretty similar to that. So yeah, you fight the boss at the very top of like his castle, and then basically like in phase 1, the whole thing is like you have a debuff and you have to clear it, and if you don't clear it enough, you won't make it to the next room. Okay, so there's kind of like there's kind of like 2 different portions to it. It's like you need to clear your debuff, and also there's the sword has its own mechanics where it'll like basically cut off a third of the room. And you have to move away from it, because if you're in the sword's area, the Cleansing Pain, or sorry, not Cleansing Pain, Command Ravage, this thing, it creates a zone on the ground that you can't cast in. It's a silent zone. So basically there's like a soften rage of like the sword, like cutting off portions of the room. There's the debuffs you have to clear. Whenever you clear the debuffs, it spawns ads, so you have to kill ads really quick. And then you need to basically clear all the debuffs so that you can make it into the middle of the room. And then once you make it there, the boss basically sucks everyone in, throws them out. You have to walk into the middle, and then you just fall through. So kind of like Blackhand, you know how you like fight Blackhand at the top, and then you fall into like the next layer. That's exactly how phase 2 starts. So basically, when all the players are done with phase 1, they get done fighting the boss, and he reaches that percentage. All the players fall in from the roof into like this big area where it's like there's like kind of like a cross room, and there's mirrors all over the place. And then ads keep pouring in. So you're like fighting the boss, and then the sword is another boss next to him. You're fighting both of them at the same time. And then these ads just keep running in from the sides. You have to like take care of them. The range has to take care of the ones that are far away, because there's actually like a gap in this room. Like if you fall, you just die. And there's platforms, but the platforms are not connected to where you're at, and you can't jump there, like unless you're a demon hunter. So basically range is like taking care of the far ads. Melee is taking care of the ads that spawn close. You're dealing with the boss, you're dealing with the sword. There's this thing called Massacre that happens. The best way to describe this move is basically the whole room goes black, and then the sword just starts flying around, just cutting up everything. And there's like these red lines that shoot across the floor and shit. And they like, basically if you get caught by one of them, you're just fucking dead. But like the mechanics of the fight are really cool, because basically like everything gets really, really dark, and then the sword just starts yelling some shit, and then just like a fucking, like a chef trying to cut up, you know, some sort of vegetable or something. But you're the vegetable, and you're like trying to run away from the sword, and it's like cutting up everything. And you're still dealing with all the other mechanics, right? Because like everything else is still happening. One of the biggest things is whenever you kill the ads, they spawn like this blood on the floor that like flings you if you get hit by it. And if you're near an edge, you'll just fall and die. And the boss also does this thing where like it spans like this circle out, and he'll do a bunch of damage to you if you're near that circle. It does fall off damage based on how far away you are. So the best way to, you know, to kind of deal with this, you just want to get the fuck away from the boss, right? So like there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of dealing with the sword. There are mirrors around the level that basically allow you to like teleport from one side to another, so you can utilize those in fun ways. But yeah, really, really cool stuff. And apparently there's going to be like a 4 Horsemen style mini boss as well during this fight as well on Mythic. So who knows how that's going to go. But it's nuts. It's all crazy. So if you can make it past that phase and you clear all the ads, phase 3 starts. So like all the anima in the room starts flowing in through the mirrors, and then it starts swirling around you, and it basically cuts off like the majority of the room, right? So like you're stuck in like the middle of the room because all the anima's swirling around you, kind of like Argus. If you've ever done Argus, you know how it like swirls around and it cuts you off. It's like that. And then there's a sword that basically cuts off the portions. Remember in phase 1 how the sword like did a third of the room every time? That's back. So the sword does that again. But this time it's not like just a sword. It's like a shade of him. So he like spawns a blood shade who does mechanics too. And basically in the last phase, it's all just about like dealing with the boss while also making sure that you have room to like run away from his explosions and shit. And then there's like a bunch of loss of control mechanics. Like the boss will suck you all in. He'll throw you all back. He'll, you know, bounce you around. He'll pull you into the air and like force choke you. And you have to deal with all this stuff while also just trying to kill the boss because it's a soft enrage. Like if the shade ends up doing 3 of his attacks, if he reaches 100 energy 3 times, the fight's over because everyone's gonna be silenced. There's gonna be nowhere safe to stand, and that's that. So I think it's gonna be like a really, really hype execute. And you know, with the whole anima portion and with the secret mythic mechanics I'm sure they're gonna add in, this one seems like it's gonna be one for the books. I'm a huge fan of this fight. I think this fight is gonna be one of those that really, really ends up being one of the best in bosses, at least from my first impression. Like usually you can get a good idea of how you're going to enjoy a fight from the first impression. And this fight actually gave me a really good first impression. And I would love to talk more about it, like in strategy and stuff like that, but obviously I'm not going to do that right now, right? Like, we still obviously need to kill this boss. The game needs to come out first, and we need to, you know, clear the raid and do all that cool stuff. But I'm sure that there are going to be all sorts of crazy strategies for this boss, just because, like, there's so much creativity you can have. Like, the fact that there are mirrors in the room that teleport you from one spot to another, really just gives you like a lot of creativity in how you can deal with this shit. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be a great fight. Like the aesthetics of the fight, if I'm gonna rank it like 1 to 10 on aesthetics are like a 10. Like you're in this fucking vampire castle. There's this cool like lighting effect. I don't know if you guys see it, but like look at this red shit. You see this? This is like the stained glass windows behind you. So they're like reflecting this light. So the aesthetic is a 10 to 10. The sword is really cool. It just flies around. It cuts everything. The way the screen like turns black and the way the sword effects look on the ground, it's like super obvious where the sword is. And it looks really cool as you're dying. So, you know, if you're going to be dying in a fight, you might as well have it look really cool. You know what I mean? This boss looks really cool as he's killing you. Let me just put it that way. Really, really cool as he's killing you. So, yeah, and the fact that you, like, change rooms throughout the fight, like, I love bosses where there's multiple rooms. And the fact that you, like, start up top and then you fall into the next room, that was always something I really enjoyed about Blackhand. And I felt like that fight was just so iconic because you just had, like, different tiers of the tower that you're just, like, falling through as you do the boss. And they brought it back with this boss, and I love it. I love it! It's so good. It's so great. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it's like, so basically, if I were to, like, summarize this fight, it's like, you're in a hot topic and you're like having an argument with the manager and then suddenly you like fall through the floor and you have to like battle a vampire. That's what this fight's like. But yeah, he's cool. He's cool. I like this boss a lot. Really cool boss. But yeah, so okay, so I think it's probably time to talk about just some general stuff about the raid. So like overall, if I were to give the raid kind of like a rating based off of my first impressions, there are a couple things that I need to kind of highlight as reasons why I think this raid is great. So I'm going to start with the good first, and then I'm going to talk about the bad. So from the good perspective, I really like the look of the raid. I like the way the rooms are designed. I like the overall aesthetic of the raid. All of the boss's abilities seemed to have like kind of a really unique feel to them, look and feel to them, so I like that a lot as well. I'm sure they'll be reused in future raids this expansion, but for now they seem really cool and fresh. I like Shriek Wing a lot. I really like Shriek Wing. Shriek Wing as a first boss with this strict pass-fail, with having your group be organized, and the fact that like you're gonna have to actually have coordination on Mythic, and you won't be able to do any other boss on Mythic because you won't have the coordination unless you get it down. I love this. I love this. I love that Blizzard is basically like, oh, you want a raid? Well, you have to get past my friend Shriek Wing. And he's gonna make you and your friends be mad at each other. And I hope your guild is really, really good friends, because you guys are gonna really test that friendship. Yeah, it's a cool boss. I like it a lot. So, yeah, Shriek Wing, definitely big kudos for that one. The other bosses are all pretty fun and cool. There's a lot of like single target bosses. There's a lot of emphasis on just like doing single target. The obvious outlier is the Sun King Salvation. I feel like this fight is just not, it just doesn't make sense. But the rest of the fights, like if you're gonna go with a, you know, target cap kind of expansion, you need to have more fights that are just cleave or single target, I feel like. And they did a good job with that. All of the bosses have like their own unique flavor. They're all like in their own special rooms. The rooms are all really big and grandiose and over the top, and everything looks really cool. But I mean, the thing that kind of has me a little bit on edge, I'm a little bit worried, is the class balance. And I know that this isn't an article about class balance, but I mean, it's really hard to talk about a raid without bringing up what is good for the raid. You know what I mean? Because like raids are always determined by what the balance is around them, because the things that the classes can do are literally, that informs the raid, right? Like if you have a class that can do all this crazy stuff, like the raid has to account for that. You know what I mean? So like there is a direct correlation between what classes are good at and what raid bosses can do. You know what I mean? Like it's very important. So to me, I feel like my biggest concern is maybe that the class balance isn't quite cooked. It's a little bit half-baked. You can't just give the class that's the best at spread cleave, also the best cleave, also the best burst, also the best single target, also the best execute, also the best survivability, also, you know, one of the best utility abilities. You can't also give them one of the, you know, basically an equivalent burst AoE cleave ability too. It's like, what are you doing? And you know, the one thing that might skew that is immunities, but there don't really seem to be that many mechanics where immunities are really good. And that's fine. Like I'm fine with immunities being bad. It's just that to me, it just seems like there's maybe a strange situation that's brewing here. And you know, Blizzard always says that they are all about bringing the player, not the class. But you're going to see some shit in this raid unless the balancing team figures it out. I'm telling you guys, it's going to be... You're going to see some stuff happen. It's going to be weird. Yeah, the balancing team really has their work cut out for them, because there's not really a use for a lot of classes right now. It's a little bit weird. A little bit weird. Anyways, but yeah, I mean, like, it's gonna be fine for guilds in the top end, right? Because like you have got in a top end guild, like a top 5 guild, let's say, or like top 3 or whatever, right? You've probably got at least 20 players that are really solid and can multi-class, okay? So it's fine. It's whatever, right? Just bring the Fodom stuff. It's fine. But for the other guilds, that's where there's a problem, right? It's like the everyman's guild, right? You're not gonna have a bunch of people who can all multi-class. So instead what's going to happen is you're just going to bring some brain dead guy who is just really not as good as your normal players, but he plays the class you need, right? So, or maybe he's decent, whatever, right? I'm just saying that, like, I think in this expansion with this raid the way it is right now, if it went live right now, you would definitely be in trade chat trying to recruit warlocks instead of bringing your own shaman. That is the fucking reality of this situation. Like, legitimately, if you have a shaman on your roster right now, you tell that guy, hey, unless you're going to heal, I'm going to recruit from trade chat and try and get a warlock, because, sorry, man. That's just how it is. So, I mean, like, that's obviously a bad situation. And I'm just using shaman as the butt of this joke because shaman's, like, hilariously bad right now. But, I mean, like, that, it's not hyperbole. Like, I literally mean it when I say that you will probably replace some of the players on your roster simply based on their class. So it's not great. And, you know, situations like this are really, really easy to avoid from the perspective of the Blizzard side of this, right? The balancing side. They just got to do their balancing, but they haven't even tuned the game at all yet. So who knows where we'll end up, but I'm just saying I've got concerns. The raid itself is fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. It made a fantastic first impression to me. I love the Dracula's Castle bit. I love that the raid is like so different from Nyalotha. It's nothing like the Cleave tiers. It's all about single target. It's got some really awesome bosses. Sludge Fist, Hungarian Devourer, Sire, they all look fantastic. Like, these bosses all look awesome. I'm just worried that this raid tier will be remembered not for the bosses, but more so for the wonky class balance, because right now you have a huge problem that needs to be fixed. And, you know, there's still time. Like, this is still in the beta. They still haven't really tuned anything yet. There's still a lot of time to fix this stuff. It's just they're so far out that I'm concerned. That's why I'm expressing these concerns in this, because I just feel like that might be what's remembered if it doesn't get fixed. But you know what? We can give Blizzard the benefit of the doubt and hope for the best. And, you know, I really hope the balancing team does get the job done. But, man, they got their work cut out for them. And I look forward to future testing, too, because, you know, testing these bosses is always really fun. I especially enjoy the mythics, because you get to see kind of like what the full idea of the fight is, right? Like, if you do the heroic, you're getting kind of like a half of the idea. It's not like the fully, you know, realized version of the fight. But then on Mythic, you like see like what they actually meant to go, or like what direction they meant to go with the fight. So it's really cool. A lot of these fights really remind me of fights from Throne of Thunder, and that's another reason I like them, because there's like a lot of really interesting, different kind of bosses, with the theme being like super over the top. Definitely not a fan of two fights in particular. Not a fan of Sun King or Generals, but who knows? Maybe my opinion on those will change. But it's looking to be shaping up. The lore, I don't really follow the lore. The lore might be good. I wouldn't know that. I'm not the guy to ask about the lore, unfortunately. But yeah, that's the article in summary.